Mr. Pappas, first to you. The country seems so divided right now, and in some circumstances, people are becoming violent. We just witnessed a man mailing bombs to prominent Democrats around the country. Why do you think our political atmosphere is the way it is right now?
Politics has become a zero-sum game, and unfortunately, it's all too divisive in Washington, D.C. You know, we've seen the rise of hate crimes, of anti-Semitism that led to the shooting in Pittsburgh recently. We've seen people lash out, and there's been a high level of political intolerance. We have got to rein this in and get back to basics as a country. It's important for our leaders, including the President of the United States, to set the right tone. And as someone who's worked at the state level, as a member of our executive council, our state's board of directors, I know how to work across the aisle. I've worked with governors of both parties, with people of diverse points of view on the issues that are important at the end of the day. I've served 260,000 constituents, and I listen to each and every one of them when they have a problem and need help. And I think that's what we have to get back to as a country, to look for ways to talk with each other, not past one another, to look to build relationships with people of diverse points of view, because that's going to open up the doors for us to be able to restore civility and decency and an ability to get some things done. I think we need some New Hampshire know-how in Washington, D.C., and that's what I would look to apply.
Mr. Edwards, now to you. Why is our political atmosphere so divisive right now?
Sure. I think we can look towards career politicians who've brought us to this point. When I think about what's really going on in our country, we have a resistance movement in this country that adds to that chaos. We've seen Washington, D.C. Politicians influence my opponent, where he is resisting the will of the people in the CD1, the will of the people of this country. And I think that adds to this, encouraging people to confront other citizens in restaurants, taking highly emotional, passionate people and sending them into places and encouraging them to confront people who are also highly emotional and passionate. What could go wrong in those type of situations? And I think that's why you see this type of chaos in our country right now. Listen, this is about leadership. This is what this is really about, leadership. Understanding how to bring people together. I've done that my entire life in the United States Navy and in law enforcement. I know how to work with people from various backgrounds, but I don't believe in resisting. I believe in leadership.
Mr. Pappas, your response can be built into the next question, which follows on this issue. Sure.
Starting with Mr. Edwards, though, so what's one thing that you think Republicans could do to make the political atmosphere more conciliatory?
Well, sure. I think the first thing we could do is start having transparency and communication. Stop demonizing one another. So when someone disagrees with me, I don't think that's a time to call them names and label them things simply because they disagree. It's okay to disagree with a black person, not be called racist. It's okay to disagree with a gay person, not be called homophobic. I think it's okay to disagree with a woman, not be called a sexist. I think we have to get back to a place where we stop demonizing and thinking the very worst of our fellow citizens when we're all trying to get to the same place.
And Mr. Pappas, what's one thing the Democrats could do to make the atmosphere more conciliatory?
Well, this is about leadership, and it goes all the way to the top, to the President of the United States and the corrosive tone that he has set for this country. And we need someone representing us in this district who's willing to work across the aisle, to bridge the divide, to put the people of New Hampshire first, but who's also going to be willing to stand up to the President, to leaders in Congress, to others when they're wrong on policy matters or when they go beyond the bounds of what should be acceptable in the public square. And I'm the only one in this race who's willing to do that. I think it's about restoring decency and integrity, making sure that we have civility in our government. I know that from my experience at the state level, and I'll look to restore that in Washington, D.C.
Our next question.